Let's dive into one of the most dramatic and frankly wildest population booms in North American history, the colonization of Mexican Texas. This wasn't just a simple migration of people. Nope. This was a massive historical experiment, and it all unfolded at, like, lightning speed.
Just try to wrap your head around that. You've got 300 years of really slow, sparse settlement, and then boom! All of that is outpaced in less than 15 years. This wasn't just growth, folks. This was an absolute explosion that would change the continent forever.
And here's the number that's really at the heart of this whole thing. By 1830, the Texian population, we're talking settlers from the United States, just skyrocketed from less than 2,000 to a staggering 20,000 people.
So you gotta ask, right? What in the world lit the fuse on this population bomb? And what happens when an experiment like this succeeds, maybe a little too well, far beyond anyone's wildest dreams? Well, that's exactly what we're gonna unpack.
Okay, so it all started with a pretty huge problem for the newly independent Mexico. They had this vast, mostly empty territory called Texas. It was vulnerable to raids, other countries were eyeing it. It was a real headache. Their solution? It was ambitious and, a little risky. They decided to invite Americans in to settle the land.
And their entire plan hinged on this one key role, the impresario. Now, these guys weren't just landowners. Think of them more like recruiters, managers, middlemen. Basically, they were the startup founders for brand new colonies. And names like Stephen F. Austin and Green DeWitt, they became the architects of this whole massive migration. And the poster child for this whole experiment was, without a doubt, Stephen F. Austin. His first colony, which was settled by a group that became known as the Old 300, was really the proof of concept. It showed that this idea could actually work, attracting pioneers who had little more than grit and a whole lot of determination.
So who were these pioneers? Well, take Jane Long, for example. Her husband, who was a filibuster, was killed. But did that stop her? No way. As a widow, she managed to secure her own land grant from Austin. And she didn't just survive out there, she thrived. She opened a boarding house that eventually grew into the town of Brazoria. Incredible.
And then you get characters who became like literal legends. Allett Strap Buckner, a towering, red-headed militia commander, was pure Texas folklore. The most famous story about him? They said he stopped a charging bull with a single punch. That's the kind of larger-than-life character this era produced.
But it wasn't all just about brawn. Not at all. You had people like Robert M. Williamson, known as Three-Legged Willie. He'd overcome a severe childhood illness that left his leg disabled. But he never let it stop him. He became a super respected lawyer, a newspaper publisher, and, eventually, a crucial leader in the movement for Texas independence.
But, the experiment wasn't all smooth sailing. Not every impresarioso was a team player. A dispute over land titles, led by a guy named Hayden Edwards, quickly escalated into the very first open rebellion against Mexican authority. This is where things start to get dicey.
Now, the rebellion itself is really short-lived and, to be honest, kind of fiasco. So in late 1826, the Edwards brothers go ahead and declare their colony the Republic of Fredonia. But when a Mexican army marched on them in January 1827, they got there only to find that the rebels had already packed up and fled to Louisiana. The whole thing just collapsed without a single shot fired in battle.
They even had their own flag, a real symbol of their ambition. But here's the crucial part. Other American impresarios, including Stephen Austin himself, sided with Mexico. Austin actually sent his own militia to help put down the rebellion. That right there shows you the deep cracks that were already forming among the settlers.
So the Fredonian Rebellion was a political failure, for sure. But being an impresario was also a huge financial gamble. It was a high-stakes game of risk and reward. And believe me, not everyone came out a winner.
Yeah, the outcomes for these guys were all over the map. You have Stephen F. Austin, who worked diligently, settled thousands of people, and did okay for himself financially. Then you have Green DeWitt. He settled 400 families, but he died completely broke. And then you get someone like Frost Thorne, who didn't settle a single family, but became Texas's first millionaire just by buying and selling land. So clearly, there were many ways to play the game, and many ways to fail.
So, while individual impresarios had pretty mixed results, the system as a whole, it worked. In fact, it worked almost too well, and Mexico's solution to its underpopulation problem had just created a brand new and, honestly, a much more dangerous one.
Let's just look at those raw numbers one more time. A tenfold increase in the American settler population in just one decade. This demographic tidal wave was a direct and now totally irreversible consequence of the impresario system.
And here's the really stark comparison. By 1830, Texians outnumbered Tejanos, that is, Texans of Mexican descent, by more than 4-1. Now, if you're the Mexican government and you're watching a neighboring country's population completely overwhelm your own citizens inside your own territory, well, that's not just a concern. That is a massive alarm bell going off. Which brings us to our final question. The experiment had definitely succeeded in populating Texas, no doubt about it. But in doing so, it had completely shattered the cultural and political balance of the region. So was this grand plan a brilliant success, or was it simply the start of a countdown to the Texas Revolution?